Some very rare games have recently popped up on a PS Vita Facebook group, and those games were VVVV and 1001 Spikes. Now, to a casual collector, these games probably don't seem all that special, but they're extremely valuable, and for one reason, and that's because they should not exist. These two games, along with The Binding of Isaac, never had physical releases on the PlayStation Vita and were only able to ever be played digitally, which meant there shouldn't be any legitimate copies of these games out in the wild, but there are. And not only that, there's also PS4 physical versions of these games that also exist. So how did this happen, and are these games the real deal? And the short answer to that question is yes. These games are authentic and they came directly from Nicalis, who is the publisher of these games, but that still doesn't explain why physical copies of these titles are now appearing on marketplaces. And while the explanation to that is kinda tricky, and it requires us to go back in time to 2018 when Nicalis put out a tweet teasing the release of Binding of Isaac physically, yet no other information ever came out after this, and the physical games seem to be lost and forgotten. Then on April 11, 2019, Nicalis made a tweet informing people that unreleased copies of VVVV and 1001 Spikes were being sold on eBay ahead of their release dates. They also told people in this tweet that the PS4/PS Vita games being sold were promotional copies that were only given to Sony employees out of courtesy. How you'd know that these were promotional copies is by simply looking at the back of the games and seeing that the UPC codes were hole punched. Nicalis then advised everyone to avoid buying these games as they were unlimited runs that will be sold officially on the Nicalis store. Then on January 10th, 2020, Nicalis put out their final tweet about these games, addressing that VVVV will still have physical copies releasing, but it's been 4 years since this tweet and they still haven't sold any of those games on their store or even addressed the previous statement. And well, that's kind of where the paper trail for these games end. But still, the controversy continued, as up until 2022, people thought that 1001 Spikes and VVVV were the only physical games to ever release, but that wasn't the case, as someone on Reddit would come forward showcasing that they did in fact own a physical copy of The Binding of Isaac. They then would go on to claim that they purchased it from a secondhand video game shop that received over 100 promotional games from an ex-Sony employee, and for the case of VVVV and 1001 Spikes, it's the same story. All the copies floating around currently are the promotional copies, as they all have their UPCs hole punched. And while that wraps up the backstory behind the games, yet there's still a lot of controversy behind Nicalis. Chances are, if you are a part of the PS Vita forums, eventually you're gonna run across people who do not like Nicalis as a company, and while that topic would probably require its own entire video, the gist of it is that Nicalis is a shady company that takes forever to port games and is known to announce titles and then never deliver. Here on the screen is just a small list from a Reddit user highlighting some of the many problems people have with the company, and keep in mind this list is over 8 years old by now, and there's been a lot more controversies going on, with one small example of that being the massive exploitation and mismanagement investigation on Nicalis in 2019. Needless to say, there's not a lot to like about the company. But still, regardless of how you feel towards Nicalis, the question remains, are there official copies of these three games waiting to eventually release? And well, there's a handful of theories circulating, with the first one being that Nicalis does in fact have a bunch of physical stock for these games, but is choosing to hold on to them for future release, with many thinking that Nicalis wants to be the final publisher on the PS Vita. While other theories claim that Nicalis simply couldn't secure enough Vita cartridges and got blindsided by Sony shutting down cart production, which actually is a possibility, as by 2019 companies like Limited Run Games were having to put 10 upcoming physical PS Vita releases on hold simply because they weren't able to secure enough PS Vita cartridges. So chances are, if these games have not already been made, the likelihood of them ever being produced is slim to none. And the last popular theory that I hear often is that Nicalis simply wants to restrict the flow of these three PS Vita games and slowly sell them off anonymously for profit. This theory is a little outlandish, and it would definitely teeter the line between fraud and unethical, so take that as you will. At the end of the day, nobody really knows how many of these games exist. Currently, there is someone on Facebook groups trying to sell their copy of VVVV and 1001 Spikes for $3,000 US, which is way too much in my opinion, especially when you consider the risk of these games being released in mass quantities. But maybe I'm wrong and these games are the only ones to exist, and in that case, these would be worth a good chunk of money. But anyways, I just thought this would be a fun video to discuss. If I missed anything, please let me know down in the comments, as I did have a tough time finding much information on this topic. And with that said, I just want want to say I appreciate you for watching this far. Please subscribe if you do like my kind of content, and I will see you down the road. Bye.